Okay, it's 2 minutes after 10, so I think we can start. Just a few things before we start. As we have informed you all, this session will be recorded and it will be available afterwards on our YouTube channel. So if you don't wish, you can keep your camera off at all times. If you need to ask us anything, you can use also the chat. And I'm giving the floor to Simone and Elsa for the session. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much, Dimitra. So I'm Simone Vandenberg. I work for Wageningen University and Research, for Wageningen Economic Research to be precise. My background is in ethics as well as in responsible research and innovation. And I'm hosting this together with Elsa Giesbers, who also works for Wageningen Economic Research, and her background is in anthropology and social geography. And we've been engaged in a project together, or 2 projects actually, partly in agROBOfood and partly in a different robotic project. And we've done a lot of work there together. So today we're doing this together with you. It's a small group, but that allows to discuss, so that's really great. So I'll give the floor to Elsa first. If there are questions or remarks, please tell them in the chat, or afterwards there will be, after her lecture, there will be occasion to ask questions. So please speak up. We would like to encourage you to do that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Simona. So I will first start to share my screen. Let's see. Yes, so I hope you can all see my screen now. I see Simona nodding, so that's great. Okay, so thank you all for joining here. This is our program of today. So I will first give you a short introduction about the ethical questions for robotics in agri-food. After that, there will be...
Just sorry, I think your screens are switched. You're showing your second screen.
And right now? Is it better?
It's very small if you're not presenting the main screen.
So at the top of your screen now, you can see a setting, how to share the slideshow. So it's a display setting. Yes. No, the next one.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you choose? And yes, this one.
Okay.
Yes. Now we can see it full screen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Better. Great. Okay. I'm sorry. Back to the program. Yeah. So after this short introduction, there will be the opportunity for you to ask any questions you have. Afterwards, Simone will give an introduction about value-sensitive design, and that will be more interactive. So we will also use some breakout rooms, and in which everybody can interact, and afterwards we can all share our results again. So now first, the introduction to the ethical questions we found in our research. So Simone and other colleagues did a literature review about the ethical questions they found about autonomous robots in the agri-food sector based on existing literature. And based on that paper, we went on with some case studies last year. We did 4 different case studies to different AI robotic systems in the agri-food sector. And the 4 robots that we used in our research are at first the manure collector for the dairy farming. The second robot was the packaging robot for the processing sector. And the third robot was the weeding robot in arable farming. And the 4th robot was the picking robot in greenhouse horticulture sector. Picking robot for tomatoes and pepper. So these were the 4 case studies we did, and for every case study we interviewed several stakeholders. So we interviewed, for example, farmers, robot developers, representatives from branch organizations, policymakers, a lot of people with different knowledge, experts in their own field, so to say. And with these stakeholders, we discussed the values that they think are important for the different robots. And first, I want to show you a little bit on what we think as values and what we see as ethical questions. And afterwards, I will present you some of the results of our case studies. So, what are values and what are ethical questions? Values, moral values, are part of our social life, of our daily life, of how we interact with each other and in our work. Some of them are maybe hidden in texted expectations, like unwritten rules, and others are made more explicit in, for example, behavior codes at work. Sometimes these values, they conflict, or there's a disagreement about these values. And in new situations where the values that are already exist no longer apply, people may feel uncertain about how to act. And in these cases, so when there is a conflict or when there is uncertainty about how to act, ethical questions or ethical issues can arise. So in our research, we asked people about the values that are important to them. And afterwards, when we analyzed all the results that we gathered, we found some ethical questions or ethical issues that need more attention. And we divided these ethical questions and moral values in 4 different themes. So one is autonomy, the second is society-robot relation, human-robot interaction in business context, and cloud relationship. And I will show a few of the results for each of these categories now. So the first category is autonomy. What the right level of autonomy was for the robots that we look into was often discussed. The robots are all designed to be autonomous in the end, while they are not all autonomous at the moment. So one of the respondents raised the question that before robots can really be autonomous, we have to be clear on how people and robots understand each other. And some people want that we should not compare robots to human beings. So that leads to the question, how then should we treat robots in comparison to human beings? And more broadly, should robots have rights? And if so, what kind of rights should robots have? And another issue that often came up that we put under the umbrella of autonomy is responsibility. Respondents did not agree on what autonomy of autonomous robots mean for risks and responsibility. And one person said, well, as when objects become more autonomous and make decisions on their own, then the aspect of responsibility definitely shifts. But to whom it shifts is not clear, according to our respondents. So that leads to the question, well, who is responsible for damage caused by robots or resulting from robots, so to say? Some even suggested that robot developers might keep their robots less autonomous than they could be to avoid these kind of difficult questions. So then the next category is society-robot relation. In this category, we discussed the public perspective of robots in the agri-food sector. Respondents mentioned that there are reasons for the public to accept robots, but also a lot of reasons for the public to reject robots. And one of these reasons to reject robots is conservatism. And we use the term to refer to respondents that argue that people like their food to be made by human beings, by human hands. And this some people said this is dependent on the context in which a robot acts. Like somebody said, in Japan, people like it when food is produced in a very clean environment, like a laboratory, and they don't mind when robots do the harvesting. But here in Europe, some people think that a tomato should grow on soil and should be harvested by human hands, not by robotic hands. So this shows that that the social context might be might have a very big influence on how the public is accepting of robots. So this then leads to the question, what is the value of traditional craftsmanship, by which we mean people who actually are with the hands in the soil, versus robotic craftsmanship? And to accept these robots, consumers will be asked to abandon their overly romantic view on the agri-food sector and on their food production. And what could help, some said, is that if robots would make food production more sustainable. But not everybody agreed on what is the level, like do robots actually make food production more sustainable or not? So what requirements should we impose on robots in this aspect? And besides these aspects, trust and animal health and well-being are also very important for the public acceptance of robots. So then the next category is human-robot interaction in business context. So AI robots are designed to be used by agri-food entrepreneurs in the end. And for them, business sustainability is of great importance, and thereby also economic sustainability. So one way in which farmers try to realize more profit is by bringing down the costs of production. And one thing that costs them a lot in the production is labor right now. So bringing down labor costs is one way to be more sustainable for a business. And many robots are intended to take over jobs, and jobs that are now mostly executed by migrant workers, or at least that's so in the Netherlands, where we conducted this study. So that brings up the question about the values of these jobs and how robots should contribute to it. So some saw advantages if robots take over jobs, and they argued, well, the robots only take over jobs that nobody wants to do anyway, and people who do these jobs now will just go back to the country where they lived before they came here to do the job. But others saw more problems in telling these people that their jobs would just disappear, and found it disrespectful to suddenly abandon these jobs while now people are here to do the hard work for decades. So this was a very sensitive topic that we found in our research. And then the last category I want to discuss is cloud relation. And with this, we mean that robots are connected to the cloud, and other machines may be connected to the cloud, and that data is sent through the cloud. So robots collect different kinds of data, and that can be saved in the cloud. And some people thought about whether a robot should always have access to the internet and to the cloud in that way, because it will have an impact on how accessible it is for some people, because especially in rural areas, the internet connection is not always sufficient enough. So should a robot then interact without internet access as well? And how will this influence the accessibility of robots? And a robot gathers a lot of data that could be sensitive to people working with the robot, or to the company that works with the robot. So who should have access to this data collected, and who should not have access? And while some data that is gathered on a farm can be of very great use for example, the retail industry, this may not be of advantage for the farmer. So who should have the rights to benefit from this data? So this is a small overview of some of the ethical questions that we found. And now I will give the floor over to Simone. But first, if people have questions, of course, ask them. Let's see. Yes,
Okay.
you're back.
Yeah, please, there's room for questions
Okay.
if anybody has them. Yeah, I hear
Yes.
someone.
Can I put a question? Thank you. It's very interesting, very, to me at least, important aspects. We are in a new era of applying really high-end new technologies into an area which has been traditionally improving through some automation, but now consequences of robotics and AI becomes, of course, very important. Seeing, for example, relationship to clouds, but in the main categorization of subjects, not seeing a relationship of the new technologies and the new development to the earth itself. I saw sustainability as an element of relationship to societies. But isn't it fair to say that now the ethical questions that citizens face in their daily lives, do I take the plane, do I recycle, do I do this, at least in countries and continents where these issues are very important, why can't we expect from industries, from people who actually do business with selling robots and automation, and to have as a very basic level this aspect of what Earth is doing for us and what are we doing to Earth by our technologies and developments? Thank you.
So why can't we put this as a requirement? That is the question.
Yes, as a basic equal to the relationship of new technologies to the clouds or to the societies. After all, everything else depends on Earth, on the planet, which is really under stress.
Yeah, well, I guess that's an excellent question that would belong under this theme of environmental sustainability and the relationship to robots. So I guess you could impose it as a requirement, but yeah, the discussion would then have to be about how we would legitimize such a request, right? So we could say, who needs to impose that requirement? Should it be the government, for example? And does the government have that mandate by the public? Because we live in a democracy, right? Is this an instance where we could overrule the mandate that is given by the people, right? So I guess the reflection about such a question that you're asking, which is a very relevant question, would be around that, asking like, who would be the actors that would have to impose such a requirement, and how can they make this legitimate? So who has the power to do this, and who is allowing them to exercise that power? So it's an excellent question, but for now it's not really resolved. It needs to be discussed. So I think it's an excellent question for this crowd as well. Like, would you, yeah.
It was just to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Are there other questions?
Question, Norbert Schlingmann from AEF.
Hello.
Good morning. I have a question to the last bubble you have shown in regard to security. So you mentioned that security has to be managed. So who is responsible to avoid attacks? Is it the manufacturer who creates, who develops the machines? The data has to be stored, and so attacks from the outside world has to be avoided. So in the ag industry, it's important that the manufacturers work on cybersecurity measures. And so who is responsible for this kind of machines?
Yeah, I think I think there are different levels of responsibility, but it's not really my place to answer such a question, right? This is again a question about who is the mandate to decide certain things.
Right.
So this could be imposed by the government again to robot developers, or robot developers could say, we take now responsibility to make it very difficult to
but that's too easy. Sorry to say that.
Right? Okay.
That's too
Please.
easy to say.
What your answer be?
Yeah, that's too easy to say that. Give it back to the government. I think the government or the European Commission or UNECE, they are creating cybersecurity regulations, and so somebody has to take care about this. And so there are lots of regulations available, and somebody has to create this kind of measures within the machines. And it could be the manufacturer. And that is a question I have. Are there any rules? There are a lot of rules available for the egg machinery, but what are robotic machines kind of? That are egg machines or not egg machines? So that's not clear for me. But I can live with the answer for the moment. I think that is a big topic we have, and it's not solved. I'm pretty sure about it.
No, it's not solved, definitely not. Yeah, so I think it's a very relevant question. There's also a code of conduct around data sharing, which is about ag data sharing. Yeah, so it also gives some guidelines, but it's of course not a requirement, really. Yeah, it doesn't have a legal legal status.
And what also came out of our interviews is that some of the robot developers also said, this is a question that is very important, but we just don't know what to do with it. So we just take off our hands for it for now, and we deal with this later, and we do other things first, just because they're also not sure how to. We are
working on this subject together with SEMA as a political arm. And this could be of interest here as well. SEMA is a partner in agROBOfood as well, and so probably it makes sense to start talking about this topic with them.
Yeah, I think that would be a very good idea. In any case, I think it's primarily the people who are working in the area who need to solve the issues, right? You can help support it with legislation, you can help with a certain procedure of thinking about the issues, but eventually it's the people in place that have to take the responsibility to solve it, right? Yeah, so I think that's the right way to go. Yeah. Let's go to the next phase of this webinar. So I'm going to share my screen as well. Yeah. What's happening? Okay. Yeah. So here. Do you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about value-sensitive design. Oh, now it doesn't respond anymore to my laptop. That's strange. I cannot control. Oh, okay, great. Now it is. So, so I'm going to introduce to you value-sensitive design, and then we have an interactive aspect to the program. So we're going to dare you to make your own value-sensitive design plan, focusing on a robot that you're aware of or that you're working on. And then we invite you back to the plenary to share your results. So to tell us a little bit and to share with each other what you came up with. So that's the program for the next 45 minutes. And now, again, it doesn't work. Why not? Oh, yeah, okay. So why value-sensitive design? And that's actually because technologies are influencing our world. And these are just a few examples of everyday technologies that we have. So we want to show that actually from cradle to grave, there are lots of technologies surrounding us in our everyday lives that actually influence everything that we do and the way we organize our lives and what we see as options for ourselves. So when we are born, There are lots of technologies around. Well, in some countries a little less than in others. In the Netherlands, there's a lot of discussion about natural births that have to take place at home. But I know that in most countries, most births are taking place in the hospital, and there are a lot of technologies around to help the women giving birth. We have alarm clocks, we have the refrigerator. Imagine what it would be like without a refrigerator. My grandmother lived in a time when there was no refrigerator, and her father was the director of the harbor. So there were fish coming in, and when they could not come in time on Saturday evening, they had to sell it all because they didn't have a refrigerator to conserve it. So to preserve it. So all of these aspects actually organize our lives in fundamental ways. Yeah, I don't know what's happening, but I'm not able to go through my slides all the time.
Can you use the arrows in the left bottom?
Yeah, I'm doing that. So I'll simply do it like this then. So why values in design? So technologies are then not only tools, they shape us in more profound ways. So you see here an example of an old man with a thing in his ear, and this is actually a hearing aid. That are one of the early hearing aids of the 19th century. And actually Bell, who was the inventor of the telephone that you see right below that, he was actually intending to develop a better hearing aid. And then accidentally he found out the telephone. So he thought, oh, we can use this for other purposes, and namely to give messages to people who are far off. And then he invented the telephone. So this you could see actually as a kind of dual use of the hearing aid that the man on top is using. Well, there on the top left side, you see the telephone, one of the earlier telephones from the 1930s. And in a lot of houses in the Netherlands, it was hanging in the corridor. And the corridors were usually very cold because people had a fireplace only in one room. So you would use the telephone then only for short messages. It was also rather expensive to use the phone. So people like my grandmother would pick it up really quickly and shout to the other side of the country that she was coming at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then she would dash the phone again and stop connection. So, and the way she interacted with his phone is very much due to the way it's designed. So it was put in a corridor. It was used for short messages because it was cold in the corridor and it was stuck to the wall, so you couldn't walk around with it. Under there, you see all of the generations of mobile phones, which were initially only to be used within the house. So then you could walk around and go to the warmer places, which would invite to talk longer, for example. And you see it develop into a kind of pocket computer where you have plenty of different ways to interact with other people, also via social media. And this creates a different way, invites a different way of dealing with your phone and also with other people. So it influences actually what we do and what options for action we see for ourselves, like calling at different places and staying in touch with many different people all through the day and very often. So it changes also what we feel responsible for. So you feel responsible to share more often what you're doing and also to ask how other people that you're connected with are doing. It changes habits and routines, for example, around where you phone, where you have private conversations, but also how you settle a date for a meeting. So nowadays you can change the place, the location, and the time when you meet, or you can change the group with whom you're meeting all the time. at several times, whereas before you really had to put the meeting in your agenda, you settle it once, you go there, and you're there in time. So it changes with whom you relate and with what community. So the community with whom you relate on a regular basis is enlarged. It changes how we relate to the natural environment also, because we're more aware via our phone and our computers of what is happening to the natural environment. And also all these computers, as well as our phones, need to be disposed quite quickly because they're updated so often that you need to replace them now and again in order to keep updated with all of your work. So it changes also our way of engagement with the community and with the world around us. So this is just an example of an evolution of a type of technology that invites in different types of designs it got. It invites different ways of interacting with it and different ways of living in the world. So this is just to illustrate that these designs are not neutral and that phones and other technologies are not really instruments, but they influence who we are. So we live not only in a biotope, you could say, but we live in a kind of technotope. We're surrounded by technologies that influence in profound ways the type of beings that we are. So this is the background of this idea of value-sensitive design. So value-sensitive design originates in information systems design and human-computer interaction. And these are the original inventors, Batya Friedman and Peter Kahn. And they thought that it would be a good idea to start thinking about the values of different stakeholders that are interacting with the technology early on. So already when you start developing a technology. So you need to anticipate how people are going to interact with it and how they want to interact with it before actually building the technology. So value-sensitive design then has 3 phases. So first there's a conceptual phase, and you map actually what the stakeholders are related to your technology, and you aim to understand and articulate their values and the value conflicts that may arise through the technology. So you can do this in your chair and think about what the stakeholders are and map the values that you think they would consider important. But after that, you could also check in an empirical way what the actual stakeholders think about it. So you could talk to them and find out what they actually consider important and map the different ethical questions that come up. And this can inform the design of your technology. And after that, there's a phase that is called the technical phase. And in this phase, you're actually thinking about what are our possibilities to translate the values that we see that our stakeholders bring forwards in the design of our technology. So are there different ways in which we might shape it, which attend in a better way to the values of these different stakeholders? So, so these are different phases in value-sensitive design. So now I have an example to illustrate this further. I'm going to show you a very short video. It's actually longer, but this is just to illustrate because I think a lot of you will be very aware of these types of robots. So I'm going to show you this very quickly. Okay, I'll stop it here. I read that there was no sound, but this is okay. This is the most important part that you saw it. So what it shows is harvesting robot of strawberries, and you saw that the whole greenhouse around it is actually adapted to this robot. So you see that the robot comes from above and goes down to pick the fruits and then drops them in these baskets. So now I'd like to invite you to think about these robots. So I'm going to enter Mentimeter now. So perhaps you can go to this site and enter the code. And let's see, so I can put this away and I can start to present here. So here you see the code as well. So it's menti.com, and here's the code. And then perhaps you can type your answer. So we would like to know who are the relevant stakeholders for the strawberry picking robot in your view. So I hope you can find it. Yeah, farm owners, for example. Yeah. Farm operators, yeah, of course. Supermarkets, customers. Safety representatives, yeah, very important too. And can you think of more people, perhaps? Laborers, yeah, very important. Logistics, definitely. Fruit buyers. So they might be supermarkets or not. Huh? Farmers, people who sell them, supermarkets, industries, restaurants, yes. Are there more stakeholders? Or is this all? I see that not everybody entered yet. Robot developers, yes. Very important. And maybe you could think also of the design of the surroundings of the robot, right? Because this is not a normal greenhouse. Agronomists, yes. And maybe also developers of the plants. Sometimes the plants also have to be adapted to the robot to make it easier to pick the fruits. So that could be part of it. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. So these, we have now a bit of an overview, right? Governments, yes, they might be very important as well. If they set the rules or if they want to foster the innovation process. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I also developed, oh, now it doesn't work again. Why is this? Yeah, okay. So now, as a kind of game, I would like to ask you to put yourself in a position of a stakeholder and what stakeholder would you then want to play. So I distinguished a few of them. And so perhaps you could choose one or more of these. Yeah, so one is going to play the laborer. That's a good one to represent. And others, would you like to represent somebody? Yeah, consumer. So you see it coming, yeah? I'm going to ask you to think about the values that these stakeholders consider important, and to think about how they could play a role in the further development of the technology. So I see somebody representing a retailer, a robot developer, yeah. And others, yeah, and another laborer. Maybe somebody can take also the strawberry entrepreneur. That'll be great. Or did we lose our participants right now? I hope you're willing to join. Yeah, great, thank you. Now we have the strawberry entrepreneur. Okay, so now we have important roles represented. Yeah, policymaker, thank you so much for taking that role. Okay, great. I'll move to the next slide then, because I'm going to ask you, yeah, I've never had this really, but now I have. So I'm going to ask you to think from the perspective of your stakeholder and to think about the values that you would consider most important as this stakeholder. So we have here efficiency. I don't know if you can see it. And the first, it says efficiency, a fair labor market, safety and well-being, continuous availability of labor. So for example, in a greenhouse, flexibility, so that you can move to a different crop, for example, or you can change what you're growing. Environmental sustainability, traditional craftsmanship, a nice interaction with colleagues on the workflow, profit and affordability. So perhaps you can make your selection about what values you consider most important from the perspective of the stakeholder that you chose. So we see now environmental sustainability as top priority. This is an important societal value and the labor market, but only 2 people have voted. So it would be great if the other people who look at it from a different stakeholder perspective could also make a choice. Because then we might get a more diverse view. So 4 people voted. 7, yeah, great. So now the fair labor market goes down and profit becomes an important one, and environmental sustainability. Yeah. Nice interaction with colleagues has also been chosen, but not very often. Are there still people who would like to, yeah, okay. Profit becomes more important, yeah. And safety and well-being, yeah. I think these are all very important values. And in relation to our robot. Well, thanks those of you who made a selection. And now we're going to the next slide if my computer is going to behave. Okay. Yeah. And if there are conflicts between these values, because, for example, what you saw is there was a value of a fair labor market, for example, but there was also a value of profit. And so imagine that an entrepreneur of a greenhouse would like to bring down costs in order to have more profits and also to sustain his business. But at the same time, he's working with laborers on the work floor who might want to stay there and actually have a job. So in what ways do you think we should solve these value conflicts then between the laborers that want to have access to a job and the greenhouse entrepreneur who wants his business to survive over time? So do you have suggestions as to what should be done to solve value conflict? Free retraining? Oh yeah, so to retrain the laborers, for example. Yeah, so you would offer training to them and then they would probably become, I imagine, eligible for different types of jobs. So they would continue to have a job, just not as a laborer. Are there other ways to solve value conflicts, you think? producers will make the decisions. Yeah, so that's more an authority decision, right? So the producer decides what to do. So then in the end, the conflict will be solved. Okay, so that's more a power decision. To compare consequences from a global perspective, yeah. So, for example, in relation to sustainability, I imagine that if we look at it from a global perspective, then we would go for sustainability, whereas if we look at individual business, perhaps not. Or if we think about labor, we could also say, well, maybe in the Netherlands there's no jobs, but maybe in other countries there is. Public regulations, yeah. Or at first have a conversation with the relevant stakeholders for this question, explain and listen to concerns. That might help to create some goodwill. And public regulations also, maybe the policymaker can say, okay, from now on I mandate you, I tell you that we should have a certain amount of jobs available for people. A detailed SWOT, yeah, about, oh yeah, the strong and weak points of the robot compared to the present situation. It has to be a win-win way for all the relevant stakeholders. Yeah, yeah, but that doesn't tell how to solve the value conflict, right? Yeah, so, but it shows a willingness to work towards the best solution, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah, I think these are all good ways to do. Some look for conversation and some more for an authoritative decision, right, by means of public regulation or producers who make the decision. Yeah. So I'm going to the next slide if my computer wants to do it. Ah, that's the end of the presentation. And then I go back to my usual presentation. So what we have here. So I'm going to explain. So if you have these values in view, then what you do in value sensitive design, you take one value that you consider particularly important and you think about what norms belong to that and how that could translate into a design requirement. And a design requirement could focus on the technology, but it could also focus on the context in which the technology is to land. So the different solutions to value conflicts that just came forward, they focus actually on the context, right? So if a regulator tells to make a certain amount of jobs available in the region, for example, then you're looking for a context solution and not so much a technology solution. And similarly, when you say, well, the entrepreneur decides, then you're looking for a context solution and not so much for a solution in the design of the technology. Well, both aspects, so the design of the context as well as the design of the technology, play a role in value-sensitive design. So I'm going to give you an example of how you could translate a value into norms and into design requirements for technology, and then also for the context. So for example, if you have a value like well-being, you could translate this into various norms, like you should maximize comfort, or you should minimize the risks, or you should minimize the fatigue of laborers. And then you could translate that into different requirements for your design. So you could say, well, we go for a friendly look of the robot, so that it's more comfortable for people psychologically to interact with it. Or it's going to, we're going to install a kind of polite behavior in the robot, so that it deals politely with co-workers and that maximizes the psychological comfort for people who are there on the work floor. Also, you could say that it needs to stop and alert operators when there's a risk. So you minimize their risk, but also maximize the comfort, because people can trust that a robot doesn't install too much risks on them physically. It takes over the most dangerous and heavy jobs. So you might design the robot especially to do these types of jobs and not the jobs that people actually find interesting or nice to do, or which are light jobs that they could easily do. So, for example, the carrying jobs, or the or the things that have to be done while sitting down and bending over. It could alert laborers in case of overexertion of muscles. So also there could be a kind of connection between the robots and the laborers, and tell the laborers when they're working not in the right way, and that it's actually dangerous for their physical well-being. So in all of these ways, you could say you translate the value of well-being to concrete ideas about robot design, which could be different than when you would not take this particular value into account. If you think about fair labor market, you could also think about adaptation of the social context in which the robot is to land. So you could say we make EU laws to protect the laborers, for example. So you translate fair labor market, fairness, the value of fairness towards norms, and then you could say we need to make laws to protect laborers, or we need to provide education, or we need to preserve jobs for older and loyal laborers. And this we could translate to design ideas, so design ideas for the context. So you could say we develop an EU plan to avoid aggravation of social inequalities, which would include also ideas about migration within Europe, right? Because in the Netherlands, we have a lot of migrant workers from Eastern Europe. And in Eastern Europe, the people go away to the Netherlands to work here. So we need probably to develop an EU plan to provide the right labor to the right people in the right places. We demand EU regions to make a quota of low-educated jobs available, or we develop income availability for them, so that if they lose their jobs, this would not lead to too large social inequalities. Or we could develop national or EU education plans for low-educated laborers so that they have better chances in the labor market. Or we obligate businesses to provide education to laborers, or demand businesses to keep jobs for older and loyal laborers. So these are all examples of how you could translate value into design requirements for the context, which may take place at a more government level, but also as a business level. So now we have an interactive idea. So we would like to ask you in the breakout rooms to talk about a robot that you're particularly familiar with. So probably a robot that you have been working on, that you're working on right now. And then to map the stakeholders, and then think together about the values that these stakeholders consider important. So there are different possibilities there, right? Like autonomy, trust, safety, fairness, profit, efficiency, environmental sustainability, tolerance, well-being, solidarity of knowledge. And then think about the possible conflicts you see between values, and then try to develop this kind of hierarchy, like you have a value on top and translate it into norms and design requirements. So perhaps you could take a picture of this assignment for the breakout rooms, and then we would like to ask you to stick around and to talk together about the different robots that you're creating, and then share with us afterwards what you came up with and what kind of plan for the design you came up with. So I'll stop sharing now. Here. Are there questions thus far? No? Well, then perhaps we could go to breakout rooms and then think about the stakeholders, their values, and how you would make this hierarchy. How would you translate the value into norms and into design requirements? So let's go to breakout rooms for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes and then come back afterwards.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Did it work out? Because in our group, there were only 2 people. So, but it was a really nice conversation. So I learned a lot about drones. And so perhaps another group can present a little bit of what they came up with, and then we can present ours, George or me. So maybe the first group first. Who was in the first group?
I think it was Farzan, Salome, and me.
Also 2 people only.
No, we were 3. Salome, Farzan, and me. But Salome was only able to join via chat, so we were having other conversation. And Farzan, do you want to share what we discussed, or shall I share something? Or sorry, I cannot hear.
Farzan cannot hear. He said he writes.
Oh. Seems that more people are having difficulties with their.
Oh, that's too bad.
Sound.
Well, maybe then you can give a short summary.
Yes, I will. So after the introduction, we talked about that we talked about, okay, what is the objective of the robot? Do we want to make do we want to work with a robot right now in this assignment that is built for bigger companies to make more profit, or do we want to make a robot that is good for the environment or for the earth or for future generations? So we decided to go with the last one. And our robot is a flexible robot that can lift a lot of heavy crates, for example, in vineyards or that kind of places. And that is affordable for small farmers, for small farms. So that was important to us. And well, we mapped some stakeholders, and we came to the value conflicts, and then the time was up, unfortunately. But we discussed that to be affordable for small farmers, but to also be efficient, that can be, well, the robot developers might want the robot to be as efficient as possible, but the farmers or farm cooperatives want it to be affordable for also the smaller farms. So that could be a conflict between those 2 values. Yeah, so we didn't get to the design requirement yet because we were not there yet.
Yeah, we also had a. We didn't get to the design either.
No. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add to that, but well, that's a short.
For some, do you want to add to it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
I had an interruption. No, that was perfect. But just before going to the design phase, maybe one business model precision could help resolving the conflict, and that was, instead of each farmer having to buy one of these systems, maybe to mutualize them through associations or another form of cooperation. That could buy a few of these systems and make them available to many farmers in a region. But that was all. Thank you, Elsa.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I was talking with George. We were only 2 in group 2, and we were talking about a flying robot. They were serving large areas, and we were focusing on on a drone then that could map the nutrients in the soil as well as the moisture, right? George, please interfere if you want to add things. And then we were going to the different stakeholders, and George said that actually there are two types of stakeholders that are most important, that he considers to be the most direct stakeholders, and these are large farms who are able to buy such a drone, as well as an agricultural organization that could offer the drone as a kind of service to farms. And these are actually the clients. So he considers these the direct stakeholders. But of course, if we look a little bit further, there are lots of other stakeholders around that, that he considers indirect stakeholders, such as the government, because farmers have to report to the government, but also the government gives incentives to use these types of technologies. And the government is interested in an optimization of the use of resources. So, so the government is a relevant actor there. But also laboratories that usually provide the service and that make the analysis of the soil, and all citizens, because the drone is supposed to help lower the burden on the environment, and this is in the end an interest of us all. And then we came to the values, and then George said, well, the more concrete value is actually profit and money, right? Because for the farmer, you won't really convince them to use such a robot until he sees an effect in his pocket. So he needs to earn money with it. But next to that, there's protection of the environment, and yeah, and that's also an important value, but he thinks that the farmer is most interested in getting a higher profit, right? And we didn't get to the conflicts that might raise between the two values, or how to design the drone. Yeah, do you have things to add, George? Are there things that I lost? Or
I think you said most of the things that we mentioned. So we have the farmers that they actually should benefit money-wise from this technology, but at the same time we have this indirect benefit to the environment. By optimizing the resources, by optimizing land usage, by minimizing water usage, and many other things. So my impression and my experience shows that if farmers don't benefit money-wise from a technology, they will not do it. They should. Number one for them is how to get more money, how to minimize expenses. They care about the environment, but they will not do it unless they get more money in their pocket. If they get more money in their pocket and at the same time protect the environment, and this is good for the environment, they will do it. If it's only good for the environment, they will not do it. They will not do it if they lose money.
Okay. And George, would you think this could lead to conflicts in your design of the drone? I mean, if you would go to for the cheapest drone that would function well, or the drone that would lead to more environmental protection, could you think that would clash in some ways or not?
The trend now is to have smaller, cheaper drones at a larger scale in order to cover more areas. And the important thing is it's not the actual drone, it's the data analysis. So the more data you get for using remote sensing techniques from satellite data, combining satellite data with NDVI data from cameras from the drone. So the analysis of the data is the important thing, not the number of drones, the analysis of the data and what the interpretation of the data you receive. So we lack now, what is lacking behind is the interpretation of the data. So you need, if you will say that we will use artificial intelligence to analyze all this data, you need a lot of data, you need a lot of computation algorithm to do all these things.
So actually,
but the trend is towards more drones, more data, cheaper drones, covering larger areas, and more data. It means better artificial intelligence, more modeling, better models, etc.
Clear. So so actually a lot of the values around data sharing also play a role around this robot then.
Just to mention something.
Data sharing, cybersecurity, protection, data, etc.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there have been efforts to have the so-called digital twins. So digital twins is to have a representation of your the land, the growth, the thing you have in the land, and simulating this in a digital environment, optimizing this a digital environment. But you need the data in order to do this. So all this data, we are still gathering the data, and we still want to analyze the data. So we will do, in the future, we'll have the simulations done in the cloud.
Okay, yeah.
And this is my vision of the future.
Yeah. So there's a whole range of issues around data sharing that also pertain to this, to these drones then, and that could play a role in your design actually also. Okay, thanks. Maybe we go to group 3. Is there a representative of group 3 who would like to say something about their conclusions of their discussion?
I think it was group 4 after, because the 3 I have reassigned and some people could not join.
Oh, that's such a pity. Okay. Group 4 then. Is there anybody there who joins group 4? Runa, Mikael, Lara, Charles?
Hello, this is Rune speaking. Yes, so we had we had a discussion in group 4, and it was mainly on safety and robot safety, and we talked about also that you just need one accident, and then you will be you will shut down a project for years, or if not forever. We talked about we had a general discussion on various items, and we also had some talk about with the sustainability, meaning that you don't want to wrap all your fruits and vegetables in plastic, because then it's better to have it open. However, with COVID-19, you might see the opposite push, that people don't want to have their food touched by humans. They wanted to have it clean and sterile by a robot. So that could be sort of a conflict between both sides coming, or if it's not there. Yes, and then Norbert had some points. I don't know if you want to expand, Norbert, but we also talked more on the.
I think you summarized it pretty clear. So there's 2 topics we discussed. Mainly the topic in regard to safety, and we had yesterday in AEF a big discussion around distinguish between the workload in big companies or in smaller companies in regard to safety and security. And I already asked this question, and this should not be underestimated. Without safe systems, and Rune mentioned it, the development companies will have a problem, and nobody would buy this kind of machines if they are not safe. And there has to be a kind of what is the right word for it? They have to trust these machines, right? They can trust the people, and here we have to trust machines. And I'm a little bit careful if I should trust the machine, and when I have to earn money with this, right? It's my when I would be a kind of a fruit farmer or strawberry farmer, I rely on this income, and when machines destroy everything, probably I'm too negative, but when machine destroys everything, that could be difficult, right? And there are human beings behind. So this is completely new technology, and yeah. Anyhow, that's what we discussed at the beginning. We had some difficulties, but now after a few minutes, we found ourselves. Let me say this, and it was a good discussion. Huh? Arif, you was with us. Anything to add from your end?
Arif?
I am sorry, my microphone is muted. Actually, all the things both of our friends explained, I don't would like to say anything more. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Yeah, this was just a short exercise to just become acquainted a little bit with the way of thinking about it, right? I experienced with George that it was interesting to first think about stakeholders, because the usual focus lies very quickly on who your clients are, and then thinking about other stakeholders as well brings in a whole new set of values, actually, that were not really the top priority of consideration, perhaps. And so I think, yeah, these various steps sometimes are a good exercise to follow to simply broaden one's reflection a little bit. Yeah, so this was just to show a little bit to you what value sensitive design is, and how it will proceed. So to have you briefly sniff at this as this topic. Yeah, I hope yeah, it was interesting to you, and please let us know if you have further questions, or if you would like to have a follow-up conversation about this. We would be very open to that. So please contact us then. Are there any last questions or remarks that you would like to make? Otherwise, I'll propose to close down. Farzam?
Yes, now that there's a little bit of time left, and the subject is very interesting to me, because very quickly one gets into, when you compare values and their conflict and their relationship, the notion of space and time becomes very, very quickly so important. If there is an accident that can take the life of one individual now for one farmer, versus if the systems that will let's say have an impact in 50 years for a large population, when we compare or look at these two consequences in time, do they have the same value, or should they have the same value? So it's just a question for me.
So the question is whether the value is the same then for present people or for future people.
Whether there is some prioritization or relativity between these values in terms of the consequences that they have. But yeah, I think it becomes very quickly sort of a personal choice what one thinks is more important.
Yeah.
And of course, for the robot developer is to develop the robots and to sell them with profit.
Yeah, it's always hard to make this kind of hierarchy of values. So what value to go for, and what type of argumentation to use then. There are, of course, different lines of thinking in ethics available. So you could think according to a utilitarian perspective, saying like, yeah, if it leads to more value for more people in the longer run, then that choice deserves priority or something.
Yeah, that's the question.
But there are also different ways of thinking, like if it respects certain principles, regardless of the effects it might have in the short or long run, then this is the preferred option, right? So so there are different ways to go around this. Yeah, but I guess the purpose of value sensitive design is very much to bring the values first into the conversation and to broaden the perspective a little bit, to include the values of different stakeholders and not to yeah, to focus too shortly on only the economic values or something. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's true that this is a very difficult conversation. Like, what, in what ways should we think about this? Huh? Yeah. And I guess, yeah, in ethics there are different lines of thinking about this. And in the end, it all comes down to what resonates best with the group that is actually designing the technology. So what line of thinking they are willing to adopt. Are there other views about this or other inputs that people would like to give? Or maybe examples of how you went about these value decisions? No. I guess then we should close this session off, and please be welcomed if you'd like to continue conversation sometimes. Then please contact us, and we can also assist if you would like to go through the whole process of value sensitive design. We can assist you to give shape to that in your company. Please let us know. Thank you so much for your inputs and your reflections, and see you next time. Norbert,
so
you wanted
much.
to say something?
Bye-bye.
No, I would like
Thank you.
I would like to say thank you and see you next time. Bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye-bye.